Hi everyone, welcome to Atrium. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Digital people of the United, the Uyghur people, and the respected elders, past and present. We have this really great exhibition of two of our fantastic artists, Miguel Olmo and Milgate. Both Miguel and Asher had exhibition in our gallery previously, and this time they are actually having a solo exhibition at the same time, together for the first time. In fact, I remember talking to Miguel at the last exhibition, and he was stating that the last time he actually had a fantastic solo exhibition, taking up the whole stage by himself. And I spent virtually a whole week here making this fantastic piece of installation in the middle of this gallery. And so we were talking about the next exhibition, and he said, okay, next time I will share the space with another artist. And I said, who would you like to share with? He said, Asher Milgate. I said, Asher is here for the exhibition. So it's perfect timing. And so Asher has been showing with us for a while now. This is his third solo exhibition with us. He was initially introduced to us by Sandy Edwards, who's sitting with us, who is a fantastic curator of artist photography exhibition. And Asher is also a very good friend of Black Douglas and Jason Wing, who are mutual friends of mine. And we actually went on the trip to up north to one of the artists, Chico Mang's funeral service. And I was going to drive up there by myself, and I thought, well, it's a long way to drive there and come back. So I actually just posted on Facebook. I said, who would like to come with me to this service? And Miguel is one of them. So Asher is one of them. And we had a fantastic trip together with Marla Bloom and her mother. So after that, we started showing Asher's works with us. And Asher is one of those artists who always like to move forward, with his work. And every exhibition, we want to do something different. So I think that is, to me, a sign of a great artist, because you're not satisfied with doing something that happened to sell well and just want to move on and do something else. So it's always challenging himself and also challenging the audience. So with this new series of work, it is a sort of follow-on from his last exhibition, where he started using the sewing machine and he basically stitched his computer work back together. So this series of work is about landscape and about the environment. So we basically tear up his black and white photos and manually stitch them back together again. So it's like how we destroy the environment, but he's actually going to put them back together. And so I think Matt will talk a little bit more about that, about their work. But Miguel, besides being an artist, is also a curator, and he's a manager of Gallery and Co, as a lot of you know. And I always tell him that, one day when he has time to become a full-time artist, I think it would be a fantastic one for the time being. Like everyone else, we all have to earn a living, so we just got to do that, until it's about time to retire, and we're going to see the best of it. So, and to have this conversation with them is another good friend of mine, Matt Cox. I knew him really well when he was the curator of Asian art and art in New South Wales, and then he decided to come out and do something different. So he's now working as a curator for Tilt Industrial Design. They curate a lot of public art, and so Matt is always working with artists. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity for him to have this conversation with both Miguel and Asher. So if you can put your hand together for all three of them.
Thanks, Simon, for that lovely welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. It's really nice to be here. It's a privilege to be here, Simon, Miguel and Asher. And it's nice to have a good audience. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners, and I'm very grateful for the custodianship of this land. I've come across from Kaimaka land today on northern beaches, which is a beautiful place to live, and I'm always very grateful that the water and the land and the sky are in such good condition for us to be living on. And enjoying some art as well. I haven't met Ashley before, I've known Miguel for a little while now, and so I'm pretty excited to be here and hear about both of their works. And it's been a really nice we've just had a bit of a chat prior to this more formal discussion. And we're going to let the others speak, but some of the things that have just come to mind through these quick conversations that we've had is a very kind of bodily presence in both of their work. Something that, it's often talked about the trace of the artist, but it's something that you feel very much here in the hand cutting that's happened in Miguel's work and the placement of these bits of paper that he finds that come to him. He doesn't search out, but they actually come to him, and the way he arranges those in almost a kind of a subconscious way, just finding his way through the colour and the forms. And equally in Ash's work, this kind of stitching that you see on his jacket, but also in the photographs and the kind of ripping of that. It is a really bodily act, and I think sometimes art is conceived as this kind of purely intellectual or conceptual practice, but I think also there's quite a lot of element of chance and the subconscious working. And in that way, I think it taps into a kind of spirituality that we're looking for often in the contemporary world. Art can give us access to that. Somehow in a way that we don't always know. And it's something I kind of struggle with a little bit in public art, working with councils particularly, but also with architects and developers. There's a real sense that of needing to plan. And there's an expectation that an artist will have a blueprint. The idea is embodied in one concept, and then that is taken off to be manufactured. But in fact, art is a much more spontaneous, not always, but at least in the case I think of these two artists' practice, it is something that happens through a bodily engagement with the materials. And it's the manipulation of that materials is as much part of the work as any kind of conceptual beginnings. And so the work comes to be as it's being made. And that, I think that's something really interesting. And I think it actually also speaks to the way that we form ourselves, our personalities and our identities, that they grow over time with our engagement in the world. And I think it gives us a sense of freedom to be able to change as we're growing, and for the work to change. But it's in both works, and it may be a generational thing. I think we're maybe of a similar age, maybe at least 10-year bracket, maybe. But dealing with the move into AI, into new technologies, and wanting to hold on. And I don't, not in a nostalgic way, but in a way which is generative, which is what that can create a positive future. So you holding on to some of those analog techniques. Miguel might talk a little bit about what he's doing with the projector over there, and Asher what he's doing with analog photography. But holding on to those practices, as I say, not in a nostalgic way, but in a way that actually helps us have tangible connection with the processes, the mechanics, and our kind of way of living in the world. So yeah, I mean, maybe I think there's some themes across both the practice where there's connection points there. But maybe I'll hand over to Asher for a little bit to talk about that. Does that make sense, Asher? Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then on to you. Yeah.
Well, thank you to everyone for coming. And I guess, thinking about analog photography and my process, and I guess my process, there's multiple phases, and I've got, I don't want to call it a problem, but I've got a thing where I can't turn my photographic brain off. So everything I look at is a potential photograph, and I'm constantly scanning. And then, so there's this itch I have, and often when I'm, and I guess probably for my soul, when I go out into the environment, I'm very still. Everything slows down, and I'm not even thinking. That's really, the core of what my work is. I'm not thinking. I'm just feeling and just sitting in my stomach the whole time, and then I'm just, waiting. Particularly when I'm out in the landscape, and the majority of these images are of trees, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But so then I have this sense, and then it's like this explosion that goes off and goes like boom, and I'm like, that's my indication to make a photograph, and that's the only thing I use when I'm working, particularly for myself. And then when I go into the dark room and I'm looking through the negatives, and like working for this show, so like we've got 15 works, but I made 40 works, and then went through the process of mulling it all down. But when I'm in the dark room, I see that negative, I get that, I'm looking for that explosion again. And then when I'm in the dark room, so one image might take 3 hours to go from the selection of the negative into the dark room, and then all of these works, and they're all torn. These are all test prints, and I'm not interested in the final, like to get it all perfect and go, okay, this is that's a 30-second exposure. I'm working towards that, but that's not my destination. That is just part of record keeping at the end of the day. But because they're the test prints, I wanted to show that process and show my journey with that negative into a final output. And then once once they're kind of printed, I can probably only do like maybe 2 or 3 in a day or in a night, because it's quite intensive. And then I bring them all back, and then I've got rugs, and I sit them under the rugs to try and flatten them. And then I go, okay, and it's like a jigsaw sometimes. Well, they basically are. And then, and then I'm sewing them all back together. But I guess, probably going back a little bit further, back to that negative. Because it's, in the enlarger, and it's yay big, and I can barely see because it's so high, and it's got the red light, and sometimes I have to turn the red light off just so I can see the image. But I'm just looking at that image on the easel and going, that's where it's going to go. So, and I've pre-torn the paper, and I've torn the paper, and I sit it, and I go, bang, yeah, okay, that's a minute. Okay, next one, that's 2 minutes. Next one, 3 minutes, and then all the way through. So I don't know what the outcome will be. And whilst that makes me nervous, it's also very exciting because I'm not controlling the outcome. It's just it's a perception of like, okay, this is what I think it will be. And if you look at the one in the far left corner, and that was, I think there's like probably 12 torn pieces. And that was like me going, okay, and going all the way through the process. And then I guess really they're reconstituted, images in a way. And then yeah, so that's kind of, that analog process, but it's also very much about the physicality of, me being a part of the work. And I'm very much inspired by painters and the artist's hand, and then, in this, for me, anything I felt like it was a mistake I went into, I said, that's going to go, that's part of it. Because, like in photography and perfectionism, which, I feel like has had me handcuffed for so long, I've gone, and that's where the tearing came from. It's like, my whole life, protect the print at all costs. So then it's like, well, okay. And I get nervous, I've got chills thinking about it, and I'm like, and you've got this beautiful paper, and it's to be respected, but then you're tearing it, and you go, oh, and then you're tearing it, oh, I don't like that tear, and then you're constantly like doubting yourself the whole way through, but you've just got to try and let go. And I think that's what I love about analog, that whilst there are boundaries, you've still got room to move. And I guess, I grew up playing sport, playing football, rugby union, rugby league. You've got these set of rules, but I was always trying to bend the rules or trying to get away with something. So that's, and I think that plays through in my work. I hope that answers.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Asha. I hadn't actually understood. I thought perhaps there were one sheet that you printed on and then you ripped it. But in fact, what you're saying is you ripped the paper first, and then printed a number of different exposures, and then put them back together.
And then being conscious of not making the same pattern. As well, and that's hard to stay in your gut when your head comes into it. And often when I'm sewing, often when my head gets into it, I walk away and I do something else. And then when it comes back, I'm back in it, or I'll let it sit there for a week. And just have studio scrawled with images.
That's an interesting segue actually, because talking to Miguel earlier, he was talking around these works here, and he was talking about, as Simon's alluded to as well, we've all got busy lives, we're trying to balance sometimes family and work and art, and someone was saying Miguel was saying this was kind of an exercise in a way for him to, the way you might exercise in sport, go out, do a bit, build on it every day. But the fact that you said that some days you come home and it just felt easy, but other days you really struggled with just the composition. And I think, back to the point I was sort of talking about earlier, art is a very bodily practice. So even daily fatigue can impact the way that you arrange the objects, right? So it's not so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Asha. I've got to say, listening to Asha talk about his practice, as he was talking about my practice, you could just, replace the word Asha and put the word Miguel, and you pretty much have the same thing, which actually made me feel very delighted to be able to be shown alongside you. When Simon did ask me who I wanted to show alongside, I said Asha because of the material aspect of the relationship between the material and whether we also use material. That was what I was thinking about. But I wasn't thinking about the relationship between the material and the process. And I started to play a little bit of a game when Asha was talking, and I think I counted the word process 32 times.
I did that. And there's probably a few more times.
And the reason that I focus on the word process, because that's exactly what Matt was saying. It's about, my practice is very much process-led, in that I know where I start, but I don't know where I'm going to finish. And like Asha was saying, you allow the process to sort of take hold and develop and carry you somewhere else. And so with these works, before I talk about this, really briefly. So this particular exhibition actually came about when I was sitting here 6 months ago, talking about my practice, talking about my work, and in some regards, at that moment, the next exhibition sort of formulated itself, which was, showing a selection of all the work as a way to be able to build up a narrative across my practice, but also be able to build up a bridge between my practice and the audiences. And again, people come to me and say, your practice is quite diverse. You're not a painter, you're not a sculptor, you're not this and that. What the hell are you? And the only one thing that I can go back to is process. And it all started with this. It all started with having very busy lives, wanting to have a creative practice, not making anything worthwhile, being frustrated about the process of everything that's going on and not having to be able to create anything worthwhile. And then sort of stepping back from all that and putting some parameters in place. There is a misguided perception that creative freedom is absolute must. And that's not necessarily true. Being able to put in parameters to your creativity actually allows you to be able to be creative, because there is nothing worse than a blank page. And at the time, I had lots of blank pages that I needed sort of to move beyond. And again, so you come home, you budget, but you need to be able to, at the very least, do something every day. And one day might be, you only do 10 minutes where you're just fucking around. then the next day you do 15, and then after a while it becomes habitual where this is it, this becomes your life, this is what you're doing for a while. And there's nothing like a goal, and the goal for me was 100, you know. So I always knew I was going to make 100 of them. And again, some of them are better than others, like Mark was saying. Some of them you're buggered, it doesn't matter what you do, you're moving pieces of paper around for hours on end and it looks like crap. And other days, for whatever reason, you're having a great day at work, you're talking to artists, you're talking to other people, you're getting inspiration beyond us in some regards. You're getting inspiration from somewhere else. I think in classical tradition we call that the muse. You know, I just think that it's just being able to be in the flow, being able to allow your mind to limit, get rid of everything, like Asha was saying, get rid of all this sort of hang-ups and just be in the flow. And it doesn't come easy. You have to be in the studio for a long period of time, sometimes to be in the flow, to be, you know, to be able to remove yourself from the process and allow the process to take hold. And that's where sort of this came along. And then that just sort of like launched me in some regards, you know. Then allowed me the freedom as well as the opportunity to then move on and keep doing a whole lot of other sort of series, which we have here.
Mm. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Miguel. I think that's really interesting what you're saying. It's basically, it's you know, it's the time. You've got to put in the time, right, to make things happen. So it's not. I mean, there are moments that you get, okay, that's it. But it's because you're in the field for a while, right? So, right? So, but look, just to get back to the analog a little bit, these things for me, I was really struck by, it actually reminded me of a mate's apartment where he had all these records lined up on the wall. No, I think the square format, we've talked a little bit about that, but I think we're so accustomed to seeing things in a portrait or a landscape format, and also because of the way we deal with our phones and laptops and all of those things. So to see something in the square, it really changed the way I was looking at it, I think. But you know, we've got the records. Do you want to talk a little bit about the slides, which are also a kind of square format as well, right? We don't something we don't sort of see so much anymore.
Well, we don't see anymore, and we should see more of it actually. I think there's an amazing, wonderful medium. So the slides is one of my latest works. It has been shown once before, so there's only one work here that hasn't been shown before, which is the one next to the slides, which is composition up on a label. But the slides themselves came about from having conversations with another curator. So, you know, talking about being included into a particular show. The show was about light, you know, just light in general. And I started to look at you know, archaic technology, if you want to call it that, and how it becomes obsolete in some regards. It gets replaced with something that is supposedly to be better. And obviously we find ourselves in a particular point in history right now where we are either at the dawn of the greatest contribution to civilization and humanity we could ever sort of have, or we are at that point where we're all going to be wiped out as human beings, potentially, if you know, depends who you're listening to. And that's obviously the introduction of AI into everything that we do. So I obviously needed to be able to work with AI itself as a medium to explore it, but I didn't want the medium to be the product in some regards. I didn't want the medium to be the conduit. I wanted the medium to allow me to do something and say something without necessarily being dominant. So then I started to, again, I created 100 images. People ask me, why 100? And it's just a goal, you know. It's just, you need to, you know. I always know that the first one is okay, the second one is okay, and then, you know, by the time you get to the 67th, you go, you know, I could stop now, but you go, no, it's 100. I'm doing 100. I want to say 200. 200 just seems too much. So, you know, you set the goal, you're going to make 100. I use multiple platforms, so there wasn't one single platform that I actually worked with, and for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was I wanted to break the AI aesthetic. When you prompt the AI, because it creates an average of everything that is out there, there is a particular aesthetic. Particularly also when I was doing this, which was in the early days of AI, I enjoyed getting this, everything looked the same, and I wanted to break that. So one way of breaking it was to jump from platform to platform and build up the image. And the images themselves are not one singular image. There are about 30 to 40 images within any single one image. And because when you normally prompt the AI, you get a 800 by 800 pixel image back. Then I would then sort of take a section within that 800 by 800 and then continually to add to it by prompting. The work is called Herbinger. Obviously, Herbinger is something or somebody that makes the announcement of something or somebody coming. So it's something that is coming, and the prompts that I use, apart from obviously trying to break what the images were giving me, I'm trying to use like classical terms in terms of contrast and saturation and depth of field and perspective and things like that. I was actually using the description of the light that survivors of the Hiroshima bomb used to describe what they saw. That flash of light just before everything else around you is being completely wiped out. Couldn't use the word bomb, couldn't use the word nuclear bomb, couldn't use the word destruction, anything like that, because the AI blocks those descriptions. The moment you say that, it says this goes against our community guidelines. Which was actually really beneficial, because then I think I got a better result by having to be creative around that. So then I started looking for actual descriptions of the light, and those are the descriptions that I use to tell the prompt. I want this space, I want a window, and the light from this window is this. And what it gives you that moment in the morning, so that's sort of like what the sun is coming through, and you're going to have a wonderful warmth day. Or is that split second before everything else is completely wiped out in front of you? And I sort of like that sort of ambiguity of what was creating. So, and then I always knew that they were going to become a slide. And I told the curator at the time, they're going to be slides. This is what I'm working on. I'm working on, on this thing. And after I had committed to that, I couldn't find a producer. I couldn't find anyone to actually make them for me. And I had already committed to this show, I had already committed to the work, and I spent months trying to research and find who the hell is going to do this for me. And I found one company in the entire world in San Francisco that converted from digital to slide. Because everybody goes from slide to digital, get your slides something digital. Going the other way around, could not find anybody, and I was the only company in the whole world. So I sent them all my files, I sent them a significant amount of money, hoping that it wasn't a scam, hoping that it will arrive back in time for the show. I'm an atheist, but I prayed a lot in between those couple of days. And then when they arrived, I was very, very delighted to be able to hold this material. And again, this is whole idea of materiality and analog. And the projector, I had it for a long time, and it needed a purpose, and it also came together. So I was absolutely delighted with that particular work.
Thanks, Miguel. Maybe it's an interesting business proposition.
It is. Yeah. I just have to find out how they did it.
Yeah. I mean, it was something, Asha, we won't go on about the analog too much more, but, you were talking about this, teaching and the way that your students, even though they were working with SLR cameras and working with sort of analog cameras, they were still consuming and mediating image through the screen. But the other thing I wanted to talk to you about a little bit is this, it doesn't quite relate to Miguel that much, but there is that in this destroying the image, there is that like creating something new. But also you've drawn a lot on history, you've drawn on your parents' kind of practices in sewing and photography, and the history of art in Australia with Ken Tyson's painting of the landscape. But you also talked a little bit about the possibility of sewing as a metaphor for reconciliation. Am I right there? Yeah, and about art as a vehicle for like imagining a new future. There's a lot there, but
the sewing, there's like it's multi-layered. Yeah. Like there's like the industrialisation of the Australian landscape, but also like my mother, as a sewer and as a seamstress, for herself, and And you know, the sewing and, you know, like you think about stitches and it creates a scar, and you know, it's a visual, you know, formation, but, you know, and an indication of a story. And that's, you know, that's very much a part of the work as well. But the sewing bit, I don't know. What was the question again?
Oh, it was multifaceted.
Like,
There's a lot of
I
questions in
had
it.
a line and I've lost it.
Well, there was one around the students,
Yes,
how they
yeah.
understand analog.
Yeah.
One around like this idea of drawing from history for a new future, or you know,
Yeah.
destruction and creativity
Yes.
happening at the same time.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like in, you know, those relationships and you know, like reconciliation, and I use the, you know, 3 separate conversations that I had with different people. When I did Survivors in 2015, I spoke to an Aboriginal man, Uncle Paul West, and he talked about the yellow box tree, and which is like a very New South Wales, you know, country New South Wales tree. And he said, for us, that was a medicine tree. And I was like, wow. And, you know, I saw the tree, I'm like, you know, and you kind of sink into it a little bit more. And, you know, there's gravitas in the story of relationship. And then I spoke to a gentleman who, you know, I've known for years, and he's got a rural background, and he said that the yellow box was the best tree for fence posts. And I'm like, wow. And then I spoke to someone else, a lady with a rural background, and she said the yellow box honey is the best honey. And I'm like, wow. So we've got one tree, 3 conversations with 3 very different relationships. And that's really at the core of, you know, this work, and using the gum tree to facilitate a conversation around relationship with the Australian landscape, and what that actually means to who. And not to say that you're wrong, or, you know, you're more right than the other, but it's about having that conversation, which is really not what we're having.
No.
In an open kind of sense. And, you know, we all know what's going on in the world at the moment, and social media and all those divisions.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm right and you're wrong. Well,
Yeah.
let's be a bit more human about it, and let's listen.
Yeah.
And go, wow, actually go, oh, that's really interesting. I've never looked at it like that, rather than going, you're wrong.
Yeah.
So
is that part of what's happening with the multiple perspectives here? But the other side of that is that you've taken the colour out and you've got black and white, which some might argue is a kind of binary position, and also the black and white sort of squares that sit in the back.
Yes, yeah. Well, you know, the squares in the back, and I guess that was kind of derived from my duality show that I had with Simon in my first show. So then, you know, like these 2 conversations within the Australian landscape, or within political Australia as we are. So then, you know, like having these 2, you know, specific conversations around that, but also, you know, in the black and white, it's, you know, it's that spectrum of like these complete blacks and complete whites, and then everything kind of, once you get out of the darks into the shadows and into the highlights, then that's when the conversation's really starting to happen.
Yeah.
And it's in that grey area that it all sits for me.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, that's a lovely kind of story around the one tree where, you know, without looking more deeply, you've got this really simplistic, okay, that's a tree, but actually it carries so much meaning for different people once you start sort of getting into it a bit.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit before around the issues around image and the artifice, and recognising that images are constructed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then I've been running some workshops, which is all derived off my practice, you know, seeing the light and having a relationship with light. And that's really what I think, you know, photography is. And I had some students, and they were teenagers, and I was talking to them and saying, like, oh, how do you consume photography? And they was like, on our phones. And they're like, where do you consume your photography? And they're like, Instagram. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So then, you know, part of that was like, okay, well, I'll show you other people's works. And I showed them some Bill Henson work and told them how big it was, you know, like that window, that's how big it is. And they were gobsmacked that that photography is away from the screen, and it's actually it's a tangible product that they had no idea. But then in our conversation we were having a friend of mine has a darkroom. He processes a lot of film, but the people who get their films processed consume it on a digital screen. They'll get their negatives back and put it in their folder, but they won't develop the print. So they're kind of only doing half the process or the project of analog photography of what it really is. And then, I remember hearing a conversation, Ansel Adams talking about, digital imagery, not necessarily a photograph. But he was excited, like in these interviews, he was excited about the future of digitisation of photography.
Yeah. I think that's it, isn't it? Like, there is real exciting potential in the future. We all enjoy the new mediums as much as we enjoy the old ones. But I feel like maybe there's some questions from the audience. Yeah.
Asha, I'm just curious, the symbolism of stitching photographs together seems to me like you're taking glimpses of something that's in the past, because once the shutter's closed, that's it. So you're taking glimpses of the past, and in some way you're trying to recreate a story through that by stitching them together. It's like stitching histories together. Is there something? Is that part of the symbolism?
Yes, definitely. And I think if you've been a student of colonial Australia like I have been for the last 20 years, and been lucky enough to grow up in a community with Aboriginal relationships, and learning and reading, you see all these similarities and these parallels of relationship and thought that was originated in that colonial period that kind of still sits in vernacular today, and not forgetting the past. And I think that's a big part of it as well, and the memory of the landscape, and it's really sits inside that landscape. And I probably revert back to a conversation with Nadi Simpson, who's a singer and a writer, and she's amazing. But she talked about you look at Sydney and how it's all developed, but she said whatever's underneath is still there. And those stories are still there, and it's like when she said that to me, that opened up again that conversation of things that disappear, and they sit side by side whether you realise it or not.
There's something about when you stitch something together, it suggests like there's a scar.
Yes.
And that's present right there, and it's like you're trying to heal something. By putting them back together and creating a new future out of that.
Yes, and there's the residue of that scar on the surface. And I think probably in Australian history
there's plenty of scars.
It's all there, and some are hidden, and some and people live with it. And that's something I think about quite deeply and have experienced firsthand. All through my life. So, and then we'll get further into the history line. My parents were school teachers in Wellington, and then we'll go to on my dad's side. His parents were missionaries, Christian missionaries in the 40s in Brewarrina, Menindee, Woorabinda up in Queensland. So that there's always been a conversation or a knowing of relationship, and and probably it's something that I've naturally been surrounded by, but there was probably a period where I was trying to drift away from it, but I just keep coming back to it because I can't escape my experiences, and that always sits through the work as well. So there's always a spirituality moment, and it's probably not necessarily mentioned in the essay by Nick Suiters, but all the titles are derived from Bible verses. Because, and the context of the sun is my religion. yes, it's such a powerful being, and I think about my grandfather who would pray. When he prayed for grace, he would always talk about thank God for the sun and the rain, because without it we don't have life. So then bringing that kind of that simplicity of life into the work, and I think for me it's just all about being a human at the end of the day, and just bringing as much of myself into the work of my life and family, really.
Thanks, Asha. Thanks for the question. Any more questions?
I'm very impressed by your sewing skills.
It's pretty
Being my
wide.
father. As regards the image on the left,
Yes.
I'm very impressed with that, because that would have been quite tricky to do the zigzag and to handle those images.
Yes.
So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine.
That's a standout from a sewer.
Thank you.
Other question? Just the last comment you made there was interesting. Oh, there's a question. Yeah.
Question for Miguel. Miguel, can you talk about this illuminated picture that's directly on your left, please?
Yeah. So that's a work that I usually say that the work made itself. I didn't make the work sort of manifested itself. As you can probably tell, I like to collect a lot of material itself rather than spending tons of money on art materials and art supplies. And that sort of goes back to my days as a student, as a poor student in Western Sydney University. Right next door to the art faculty there was a rubbish tip, which was a clean landfill. And every day the trucks will come in, they will deposit up all those stuff, and I'll go through there and pick up enough materials to create things. And that ethos sort of stuck with me. So I collect a lot of things. I collect things that, to my wife's, surprise. So often it's like, what is that? We had it for a month. I collect a lot of things that for me resonate. So that work came out of me making another work. So the shapes that you see here, again, so after I finish this work, I then continue the practice of doing something every day, which is exactly the same thing without necessarily the aim of any of those things being important, but the accumulation of all that being important. So again, I will come home every day and I will draw every single day. I will just draw and draw and draw. Then all those drawings, when I was drawing them, they were always going to be sculptures. I always knew they were going to end up as being sculptures. So I did 100 drawings. Then I turned those 100 drawings into 100 sculptures. And to be able to get from the drawing to the sculpture, I used carbon paper to trace it onto the wood, which then I sort of carved with the bandsaw. But in my hoarding moments, I kept all of them. And it's only when I had finished the sculptures and I came back to the studio and I had these 9 pieces of cardboard paper that they revealed themselves to me. And I saw a stained glass window in a church. So then it was a very, very easy next step, which was I'm just going to get them into a light box and then see sort of what happens. And frankly, every time I show this work, people come to me and say, it's a very, very spiritual work, which wasn't the intention, but the intention in some regards is not important anymore. It is what the work does to the viewer. And it's the simplicity of something that I had no intention to make, but then when it made itself, made perfect sense and I had nothing, but to do it. So, like I said again, it could be just the remains of the trace of me spending hours, literally hundreds and hundreds of hours, both drawing, transferring onto the wood, carving the wood, and the fact that the material itself is important enough that I shouldn't just discard it, even though it's no longer has its purpose, because you get to a point where it's so light, so thin that you can't use it anymore. But it still has a purpose. Everything has a purpose, and so that became from light to dark, that particular work.
It reminds me very much of an image in the Cave of Lascaux, which is 30,000 years old. So you're not alone.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Paul, you got a question?
A question for Miguel. I'm really intrigued by the work in the black frame because I know that's made on photographic paper.
Yep.
I don't know if you can speak to that because how do you look at it? There is no reason. It's not a photographic image, but yeah,
It's a photogram.
photogram.
Yeah, so it's a series of photograms. Again, a lot of my work. Again, when I was going through those periods where I wasn't being creative and I started to sort of set parameters in terms of what I'm going to do, I came across a phrase. It was by one of the members of the Fluxus group, and I can't remember who it was now. I think it was an art forum, and he says the best critique for an artwork is another artwork. And that has become ethos in everything that I do, which is where the idea of the perpetual pendulum sort of resides, in that rather than putting the work out there and let society or critics criticize it, I criticize the work myself. So that particular one is two failed artworks before it became a successful artwork. So it became a series of photograms that I did in a darkroom, actually literally using light and photographic paper, which was a failure. Then I cut it up because I usually can cut up things and either they become grids or become sort of like shapes in some form and then sort of reassemble them. And I thought that the work was complete, but it was also another failure. And then put it aside for many years. It was in my studio for many years. And then as I was moving on from using reflective surface backgrounds, because I think I had reached a limit, I don't think the reflective surface needs to continue to reiterate. Then that background came up and then I repurposed it. So again, it's the whole idea. So within my practice, particularly this body of work, reflects on how cultures really flourish when cultures actually meld and blend together. And so that it was just perfect to continue to build upon something that was already there, whether failure or success or whatever, but continue to build upon that. And that again, I don't throw much away. My studio is a jigsaw box of things that one day will come out and be used again. So,
Okay, well, it's been wonderful hearing from both the artists. There's still, we've got the afternoon, there's some wine and water, so, ask some more questions, have a look at their art and find some time to talk. But I'd like to ask everyone to put their hands together for